Okay. So we've got our thread here. There was a couple people that had continued discussions in our main channel yesterday during our lesson and during the walkthrough that we did yesterday. So just a heads up, I probably won't see questions that come into our main thread. So find where I dropped the Zoom link, and usually right below that you'll see some sort of discussion message or something here. Jump into that, and this is where you want to ask questions if you want me to see it during the lecture. So just a heads up there. Let me see if I can move these down so they're out of the way of my tools. Zoom tools get in the way, or maybe I can drag these. Oh, sweet. Second screens are the best. Okay. Sorry, just getting set up here. All right. So it looks like we already have a couple questions, or a question. Okay, cool. So Andrew says, if possible, would you mind using a CodePen or any other sandbox style site? I don't know about everybody else, but I find it easier to follow along that way. Yeah, that is a great question. And a couple people actually reached out to me, DM'd me yesterday about the same thing. So with yesterday, we will be using, like Tom said, there's this tool called Code Sandbox, which we will be using, and I think we'll be actually jump into that today. Yesterday, since it was brand new with Redux, I wanted I wanted to, and this is something that's been done with other cohorts from other teachers, we wanted to show you just in a plain HTML file how to bring in React just from that point. So that was done purposely yesterday, just so you guys are aware. But yes, for most of the rest of the time, we'll be using Code Sandbox. So cool. Linda asked about the Saturday thing. So this week is going to be a normal week, I think. Next week we have Monday off because of Labor Day weekend. And if you're not in the US and don't have that holiday, that's a holiday we have every year in September. So the first Monday of every September is Labor Day weekend, and we're going to take that holiday for you guys, the PMs and the teachers. So because of that, we won't be able to we still have a full week's worth of content to cover next week. So if we have Monday off, that pushes our lessons back all back a day, and then we would have the sprint project on Saturday, but we're trying to figure it out so we don't have to do that. So I will let you know more on that coming up. All right, so yesterday we was kind of a avalanche of information of new things, and these were the objectives that we talked about. So we talked a lot about what React is and the potential problems it addresses, and then what tools are required to start a React app. What we covered some syntax, some React syntax, and how do we write code in JSX, and what are some of the basic patterns that we will see when building React applications with components, etc. So that's where we got to yesterday, and today we're going to be mostly covering props. And the reason that we want to props are a really important part of React. They make our components dynamic and reusable. So yesterday we talked a lot about how we can make these cool components with React and make them reusable and put them and use them throughout our entire app. But we didn't really make any kind of dynamic component yesterday. So with props in a component, we now will be able to add dynamic content to a component and be able to reuse that component in different situations, in a different context throughout the different places in your app, with dynamic content that will change depending on where and how you're using it. Looks like we're still getting questions about next week. We need to move on with the lesson. So if you have questions, I've discussed it briefly with your project managers. Feel free to shoot them a message or feel free to DM me after the lesson here today. Okay, so let's take a look at what props, what they are and what they look like. Let's see. So I'm going to create a new HTML file. We'll start an HTML file today, but we will move to Code Sandbox later today. So I'm going to create a React, and please do this with me. Sorry. So everybody, I want you to create a React-props HTML file, and we're going to open that up, except I don't have, there we go. Code, now I can do that. Okay, so we're going to be in our React props HTML. We're going to borrow this same HTML stuff here. And I'll post this in the I can't think and type. I'll post this in the channel for you guys right now. HTML. Okay, so there you go. All right, so we have our React app. We've got our dependencies that we need and our Babel, and we're going to write some JavaScript and push that through our Babel compiler that will let us do things like our JSX. So give me 1 second to pull this up. Okay, for some reason, this isn't working where I need it to. No, that's not what I want. Okay. That's all right. All right, so let's build a component. We're going to create our same, we're going to create our button component again. So I want you to take about 3 minutes to build a button component that just has or take about 5 minutes because you're going to have to target this div up here and get it displaying. So what we want to do is display a button in your browser by using a let's call it a dynamic button component. Okay, so take this component and I want you to build a button and render it inside this div tag. And then we'll walk through it in about 5 minutes. So I'll put a timer up here for you. All right. So, oh, thank you, Michelle. We are missing HTML. Oh, that did it for us. Okay, so a couple questions came up concerning how to open this up in our browser. So I've got the file right here. The easiest way is to find it in your file directory and just plop it right into your browser. Another way you can do this would be to open a file and then go to it, and it would be right there. So a couple quick ways to open just an HTML file. So we've got that open. Drag from VS Code. I did not know that. That's really cool. Okay, so what are the steps to get this to display? You guys are going to build this for me, and we'll continue that pattern as we learn about props because it's going to be easy and you guys already know a lot of it. So, okay, cool. So we want to use React DOM rect, and we're going to use the render function. Okay, so remember, we're just in JavaScript. React DOM is an object, and it has a method called render on it. And we are going to invoke that right here. And the first argument, we're going to have two arguments, right? The first argument is going to be this, this component, and we're going to render it like so. Okay, great. And then we're going to pass in as the second argument this string of JavaScript, this JavaScript expression right here. So what is this expression? It is another object with another method that's being invoked and given a string target, which basically is going to look on the DOM and grab this node right here because we're getting this element by ID. And we're passing in the ID name, which is target. So, okay, now what can we do to build out this button? What are the next steps here? Cool. So yeah, let's use Michael's. And I want other people answering as well, please. Michael, you're doing great. Nice, Patrick, getting in there. Okay, so everybody's kind of got a similar solution. I like Michael's though. We're going to return some JSX from this function. So the JSX is going to be a button tag, and it's going to say boring button, wah wah. Okay, there we go. So we've got our boring button. Now we save and refresh. Wah wah, boring button. So this is about to the point you guys got yesterday, plus a little bit of extra, adding more components and different files and importing them and nesting them. We're not going to talk about nesting right now. What I want to do is figure out how we can make this not a boring button. How can we use, how can we make this a dynamic button? So right now we've got a boring button component, but we want a dynamic button. Props is the answer. Awesome. So let's talk about props real quick before we introduce it to our button. Props is a way that within a React application and within these dynamic components that we can pass data to different components in our application. So what does that even mean? If you think about data, there's kind of, with every web application you have, there's kind of this flow of data happening. Now, usually in when you're coding, when you're programming a web application, this data flow goes a lot of different directions. With React kind of forces us to make our data flow unidirectional. So there's going to be one direction for our data flow, and that is from the top to the bottom. So what does that mean? If we have a component tree, let's look at some images. If we have a React component tree, like, oh, this looks really good. Let's open this up. Not the page. There we go. Okay, zoom in here a bit. So this is a really good idea of a component tree. We've got our top level app here. There we go. And you can see that it's got some nested components. Our one nested component is a header. It doesn't really have anything inside of it. It just creates its own header. But then we've got this main page component that has lots of children components that have children components that have children components that have children components, right? So when we talk about data flow, how it flows from the top to the bottom and on only one direction, we're talking about having all of our data at the top of our application and passing that data, let's do a different color, passing that data down to children components that may need that data. So if our left nav out here needs a piece of data that is stored in our application, then our app.js component has to pass that down to our main page component, which then passes it down to our left nav component. We don't ever want to, and we can't in React, have a piece of data that's passed the opposite direction. So this is wrong. This is no. So I want you to start thinking right now about this top to bottom data flow in React. And this kind of architecture, when you're thinking about things this way, this will help you immensely as we get into a lot more complicated situations in the very near future, like next week even. So if we're already thinking this way, it's going to help us stay organized as we're building out bigger, more complicated applications. So how does this work? We know that we've got our data in our kind of top level component, and we want to pass that down to children components, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, yada, yada, yada. We've got to get our data from one component to children components. And the way we do that is with props. Okay, so Patrick says, does that mean yesterday we didn't follow this flow? It seemed like data we passed up the chain yesterday. That's a really good question. We weren't passing data necessarily. We were passing the full component. So our main page, for example, would import chart modal, results table, and left nav. So those are all kind of going in this upward direction. But don't let that confuse you with passing data in this downward flow. Okay, we've gotten really messy. Whoa. Okay, so we need to be careful not to confuse that, because yes, these children components all need to be imported kind of up the line, but we're not using React to pass data when we're doing this. We're just importing components and rendering them in a parent component. So if you want to try and think about it this way, we can still think about this top down, where a main page, this upper component, is responsible for rendering all of its children components. So it's going to render these 3 children components. These 2 don't have any children components. This one is in charge of rendering these components here. And so we still have this downward flow of nested components. Okay, so try and think about it that way rather than passing like a component up the chain. But really good question. All right, so let's take a look at this. Oh, I need to not draw for a second. Okay, let's take a look at this image right here. So this is just simple interaction between a parent component and a child component, and I want you to completely ignore everything on the left side over here. We'll get into emitting events by the end of this week. Yuck. So what I want you to pay attention to is this right here. We pass props from a parent to a child component. Now, a couple rules about these props. Props are immutable, which means that they cannot be changed. There has to be a better way to do this. Immutable. Ha! We did it. Props are immutable. They cannot change. A child component cannot receive a prop and proceed to change it in any way. So if we had a piece of data up here that was called count, and it was set to 3, and then we pass that down to our child component, and let's say this child component is responsible for rendering the count to the DOM. This child component can never do anything like count plus 1. Okay, this is a big no-no. This is what's called an anti-pattern. This is something that, even though we talk about React being unopinionated, there are a few exceptions where React tells us we cannot do things like this. So, and this is actually where this stuff comes into play. So the only thing that child can do with this count prop is display it, is render it. It cannot change it. If count has to change, if we've got a button somewhere else that says increment count, then that has to happen inside this parent component where that data is being stored. And then what's really, 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 really cool about React is this. So let's say, okay, before we jump into what's really cool, I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. Let's look at some of these questions. Let's see. Insert text boxes. Oh, that's cool. Can the parent change the prop? Yes. So we just answered that, right? Does that make sense, Melanie? The parent can change this because to the parent, this is not a prop. This is a piece of data. So that's an important distinction to make. To the child, count is a prop. But to the parent, it's just a piece of data. If the parent changes the prop, does the child automatically receive the updated value, or does it have to be sent? Yes, perfect segue into what's really, really cool about React is your question right here. So when we click our button that says increment prop, and our prop changes, I'm going to use my eraser tool. Ding. Die. Cool. If our piece of data on our parent changes from 3 to 4, that is automatically sent to our child component, and our child component will re-render our count. Yeah, it's so cool. So this is what makes React super, super cool, and why it's become kind of the de facto way of most front-end frameworks is yes, thank you, Michael. There we go. Is this idea of, wait for it. Any psych fans out there? Reactivity. So where do you think React got its name from? Bing. So what makes React so cool and kind of the de facto way to build our components or build front-end applications, no matter what framework you're using, every framework has kind of gone to this idea, is this child component will automatically react to our data changing. And we don't have to do a thing. We set up our child component to render count, and as soon as our props change, it will re-render with the new value, because it is reacting to that change in our state. State, remember, is our data of our application. So when you hear state, it's kind of goes hand in hand with data. So when our state changes, our child component is automatically going to react to that change in our state and re-render our count. Super cool. Yes, Joseph, this is, thank you, Casey, love it. Joseph, this is exactly why the virtual DOM was created, so that we can detect this change and know exactly which node within our child component to render. So Michelle says, what is state? We're going to learn about React state in a couple, or tomorrow, I think. But the idea of state is just data that's in your application. So if we have, if you're looking at Facebook, actually, let's even do this real quick. Okay, I'm gonna clear this, even though it's so beautiful. Goodbye. So let's look at this website real quick. You may be familiar with it, lambdaschool.com. So state on Lambda School would be things like this text is some kind of data there. Any kind of data that you can see in a web application. Let's scroll down a little bit. Let's delete our drawings. Is there a login? Oh, let's see. We want to, so let's go to this apply now. Full stack web. So right now we're loading data, we're loading the state for our application. And this data, so if I were to start typing into here, we're adding new data to this web application, to this web page. And somewhere somewhere in this web app, somewhere in the code, my first name has been stored. So that happens in this parent component. We're storing our data, we're storing our state in this parent component. Now, don't let this get too confusing because we're not going to worry about changing data as of right now. What we're concerned with today is how to accomplish this. So today our data is going to be static. So we're going to have data stored, or we're going to have state defined in a parent component, and then we're going to pass that data, that static data, to props. So we'll worry about changing data tomorrow and updating data so that our child component changes tomorrow. Today, let's learn about this process right here. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. This is a mini database for, if we look at this one again, our app is a mini database for everything all the pieces of data that these need. A quick caveat about this: if there is what's a good one? So let's take this left nav component. This left nav component, you can look at all the rest of these components. This left nav component is going to have some data that's unique to only itself. In that case, we may store some data inside this component and not store it up here and pass it down as props. So it's at this point that we as developers get to kind of make decisions on where we're going to create a little database and where we're just going to store unique data inside a component. But again, we'll get to all of that in the coming days. So let's go back to our code. Vera asks, so the prop the child receives, so is the prop the child receives an immutable pointer to the parent prop, or is it an immutable copy, or is it something else entirely? That's a really good question. I think it is a pointer to the data that's stored in the parent. So I wouldn't call this a parent prop. I would call this parent data here. Okay. So yeah, I think it's an immutable pointer to the data that's in the parent. But I'll take a look at that today and see if I can find the answer to that. Or if someone else knows, please let us know. But I'm pretty sure it's just a pointer to the data that's stored in the parent component. Okay, so it's about 9:50 Pacific. Let's take a short 5-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll learn about making our boring button a dynamic button using props. Okay, see you guys in a minute. All right, come on back to your computers. Okay. Ba-ba-dum. So we've got there we go. We've got our boring button, and we want to make this a dynamic button using props. So what we're going to do is every component that we build in React has access to an object called props. So let's inspect this real quick. And let's see if, or let's actually console log this. And we're going to log our dynamic button. And we're going to refresh. And then for some reason I thought that was my console. Obviously not. Okay. Oh, we don't have, maybe we can look at this in React. I don't know if we are going to be able to. That's okay. That's okay. We'll be able to do that in a minute. So this is we need to save this. So we would have to do this kind of how we set up yesterday's, like this guy right here. Create element. So that's okay. We'll just look at it in our editor here. So every component, every React component we build has access to an object called props. And the way we get access to that within our component is by passing it in as an argument. So we pass that in as an argument to this function, and now we have we can access this props object. So we're going to, and then we're in charge of building up this props object with the dynamic data that we want. So let's pretend that we have a property on this props object called name, or we'll call it button text. So we're going to do this curly bracket syntax. We saw this briefly yesterday, but we didn't really get a chance to talk about it. Within your JSX, if there's anything that you want to, if you want to be able to run a JavaScript, if you want to execute some JavaScript within your JSX, you can do that inside curly brackets. So we'd like to access props.button text and display that inside our button. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this, this JavaScript. We're going to call it within our curly braces right here. And now we have access to things inside the JavaScript stuff inside this component. So we're going to say props.button text like this. Okay, so this is going to evaluate and down to whatever value is on this property, this props property. Okay, so button text is going to be, the value of button text is going to be inserted here and display on our button. So the question is, how do we add this this property to the props object? Well, within within our dynamic button call here, where we're displaying this component, we can add custom attributes that get passed down to the props object. So let me say that one more time. We're going to add a custom attribute. You guys know what attributes are, right? This ID is an attribute. This lang right here is an attribute. These are attributes, cross-origin, source. So we're going to add a custom one, and then our custom attribute is going to be the name of the property that we want to put on the props object. So for this, we need to add button text as our custom attribute. Now, after the equal sign, so before the equal sign, to the left of the equal sign, is the property on the props object. Okay, so those tie in right here. After the equal sign is the value of button text from our props object. So we're going to say fun button. And then let's save this and refresh our browser. And we have a fun button. Hooray! So let's take a look at this. How did this work? We created, yes, that's better. You guys are getting it. 10 points to Gryffindor for Brian Ruff. So we've got button text attribute. Oh, yes. I think I've been wondering this. So I've got a 4K screen that I'm working on, and it's obviously big enough for me to see. But I've been wondering if it is tougher for you guys to see on your end of this Zoom. That's not what I want. Come on, drag. Oh, well. Oh. 10 points to Slytherin for Brian. Okay, cool. Is this a little better? Okay. Sorry about that. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. All right, so let's look inside our render function. We're rendering this component. And on this component, we are attaching a custom attribute. This attribute, the name of this custom attribute, gets added to our props object as a property on the props object. And then the value of our props, or the value of props.button text, is now what we pass here. So what this would look like if we were just to draw out const props right now, we would have button text equals fun button, like that. So by doing this on our component, by adding this attribute with this value, we are essentially doing this. So this is going to be important to kind of get into your mind the relation between this right here, this attribute, and what we're giving, the value we're giving it, and the props object. So props is simply an object with key value pairs. The key, the property, is what we call the property here, is determined by the attribute name there. Yes, absolutely. That's a good idea. Okay, I'll leave that there for you guys to look back at, remember our discussion here. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to open up Code Sandbox, and we're going to create a different scenario with props. And I want you guys to help me build out our application. So I'm going to actually just drag this off screen. And we're going to widen this. Okay, Code Sandbox. What is Code Sandbox? Code Sandbox is a lot like CodePen, but more for like JavaScript, full-on JavaScript web or front-end web development. So after we're done today, I would like each of you to go to codesandbox.io and create a free account. Actually, let's do that right now, so I can give you the URL, and you can actually pull it up and be working alongside me. You could kind of like you would with CodePen. So go to codesandbox.io and take a couple minutes real quick to sign up for a free account there. Oh yeah, sign up with your GitHub account. That's a really good idea, because one thing that's really cool with Code Sandbox is you can actually add a new sandbox and import something from GitHub. For example, watch this while you guys are doing that. This is going to be cool. So I can go into, this has to be where you have a package.json file. So I can take this URL and import from GitHub, tag that in there. And now I have yesterday's project right here in Code Sandbox. So you'll recognize all the files. Bum-ba-dum. It's so cool. Sorry, I'm distracting you. Okay, 2 minutes. Sign up with GitHub so you can do cool stuff like this. Okay, so we're going to start building this out. We don't want this one though. So if you haven't gotten to the point that you have that built signed in, that's okay. Still follow along with what we're doing, and you can get signed up for that after we're done here today. So we're going to create a new React sandbox. You don't have to do this. I'm going to give you a link to what we kind of build out here. So this is created with Create React App. very similar to how our project yesterday was created. So you'll see similar setup within our package.json. We've got our index.js, which is our app component, kind of our wrapper component like we have up here. And then in our public folder, we have index.html, which has the root div right here. So our index.js is going to grab our root div like that. Okay. So let's do this. We're going to delete this out of here. And we're going to create a new directory called components. And we're going to build a new component inside here. So let's have this be a Hogwarts students.js component. Now inside components, whenever we have this file, you saw this in your files yesterday, we have to import React from React. And then if you have CSS, obviously you would do that. This is an important step for every React component. So cool, let's do it. Let's create a function. I'm going to do this a little bit different. We're not going to use the const. We're just going to create it like this. And we're going to say Hogwarts student. Let's rename this. Let's rename it to student. Yes. Okay. So now we have a function, and therefore we have a component. We know that we're going to pass in the props argument here, and we're going to have access to our props like that. So we want to make this a dynamic component that will take in a student prop. So we're going to have access to props.student, and it's going to return just a basic profile of our student. So let's do, really quick. We want to do something like this. We want to do like header, and we're going to use our curly braces because we're going to make this dynamic. Do props.student. Student is going to be an object, so we're going to do something like this. Name. Thank you. And then we want to do like another property down here to kind of introduce them, right? So we would do something like identity. We'd want to do something like this, right? But with React, you can only return one element, one top-level element from this component. So you can see that there's a squiggly line that says adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in a oh, that's dumb. There we go. In an enclosing tag. Do you want a JSX fragment? So what it's saying is you can only have one top level element here. So everything that we do has to be wrapped in some kind of wrapper element. Usually you'll see this like that. So now we're okay here. This has to be H4. So just a heads up, if you want to do something like this where you're doing two different elements, make sure they're wrapped in a single container element. Okay, so let's save this. Let's save our index.js, and we're going to import our student I'm going to delete all of this real quick. And we're just going to say, I am a student component. And return that. So let's export this. We know from yesterday's difficulties that how this goes, right? We're getting used to this syntax a little bit more. Now we're going to go into index and we're going to import that component. So we're going to import Hogwarts student from, and then the path, which is to component to Hogwarts student. Components to Hogwarts. That should be completing for me. Like that. Let's try. Components slash Hogwarts student. Okay, I think it's going to, oh yes, because it's going to be this, but we need our components in our source folder. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so we want source slash components. All right, now we're all set. So we are going to, we're going to have our app component render our student. Let's grab that. There we go. So quick caveat with Code Sandbox, when you click save, it formats everything for you. So if I click save here, it will format this whole page how it thinks it should be done. So if we have an empty component in JSX, then you actually make that a self-closing component like this. This is okay in JSX. So it auto formats for us when we hit save, and it'll do this, and then it'll pop our div up to one line because it's not long enough to wrap down. So just be aware of that if your files are changing and you don't like the changes. That is why it's happening. So, inside here, we're going to render our Hogwarts student. Now we need to have something. So right now it's rendering I'm a student component, but we want it to render some dynamic data. Well, we're going to create some data. So remember how we talked about how our upper level components, like this app component, are kind of the mini databases. They hold our data. They manage our state. They manage our data. So in our app component, in our app file, we're going to create some data for our application. Okay, so we've got these three objects, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. We're getting the green squiggly line because they haven't been used yet. Okay, so I'm going to save everything, and I'm going to share this with you guys, and you can open this up, and we're going to work through displaying our different Hogwarts students in here. So we have a question. Haha, nice. For you Slytherins would do that. Two dots. Okay, yeah, all that. So is the naming convention in React with components and the directories, they're they're in to always be the same. Yeah, so usually, for the most case, you'll see the file name and the component name the same thing here. It just makes it a lot easier to be looking in your file structure when you've got a huge application with hundreds of components to be able to find what you're looking for easier. Yeah, so I just shared this with you. So fork, you can click fork on when you open that up, right up here in the top, and then you can be typing into it, and then it'll save in your profile as well. Okay, so let's make this dynamic. Let's make this fun. Let's display our Harry Potter up here first. So we've got this Harry profile. Harry profile. We want to pass our data to our component using props. So how can we set this up? What do you guys think we can do to set this up and make this a dynamic component? Let's go into Hogwarts Student first, and let's take away our p tag, and we're going to return some JSX like this. So if you can, follow along here. If you get stuck or something's broken, then you can just watch from that point. Okay, what do we want to do inside our return? We just talked about having a wrapper component. So let's build that. Now let's build something. What do you guys want to put inside our Hogwarts student component? How are we going to display these different students? Yeah, I like that. Let's do name and identity. So first of all, let's look at our data and see what's even available. So we have our name, they all have identity, they all have an age, and they all have a best friend. So a couple people are saying different things, name and identity, name and best friend. Let's do it. So what's the code for name? What are we going to do for name? Tell me what to type here. Do 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 do. Good. We're going to use this .props.name and props.identity. So for a functional component, we don't need to use this yet. That'll be for class components. So we're just going to use props.student.name. Ooh, I like that. So instead of just using props.name or props.identity, we're going to just pass a student to the component, and we're going to have an object that's called props that has a student on it. So let's make an h1, and we're going to, inside our curly braces, you don't have to do the spaces like that. You can do it like this. We're going to do props.student.name, and then close that out. Okay, it's complaining right now because we don't have student on here. That's okay. We'll fix that in just a minute. So don't worry about the errors yet. So let's do an H4 for the identity. So what are we going to put inside our H4 here? What goes inside our H4 tag? Perfect. Don't forget the curly braces, props.identity. And then let's do one more let's do their age for props. Oh, we kind of messed up here though. Okay, so yep, a couple people said props.student. So we need to make sure that we have that we're calling the student object and then the property. And then let's say their age like this. It's okay, Tom. There's a lot of different ways you can be doing this. H4, cool. So now we're getting an error because student is undefined right now. And that's because in our index.js, we haven't passed a student in to our props. So we're looking for something. Our props right now thinks it's supposed to be like this. Right, with a name and an age, etc. So we're trying to that's good. So we're trying to do our component is assuming that props looks like this, that we have a student on our props that's an object. So what? Oh, perfect. So Tom has it right. So we're going to go into our index and we're going to pass a student as the attribute on our component. Okay. So we know on our props we have a property on our props object called student. So we need to have a student attribute right here. Okay, do you see the connection there? This attribute ties in with the property on our props object. Then we can take that attribute, or we can take that property and call props.student like that. So what we did before was we were just passing text into our button, right? You've seen attributes like this. Like we would have text in here. If this was like an input, we would do type equals text. So with JSX, remember this is JSX, if we have something that's not actual, like a string, then we need to use curly braces, just like we do inside here. So now our curly braces is going to take one of our objects. Okay. We can't do it like this because this is literally passing the string Harry profile as the value of our student. Instead, we don't want to pass the string, we want to pass this object. So we'll do curly braces like that. Okay, now let's cover that up. And there we go. Bum, 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 the chosen one. Okay, but this is a little weird. This is not necessarily the best user experience because we don't know what 11 is. We don't know what the chosen one is. So to make this a little bit better, before we do our curly braces, we're going to pass in something like this. We're going to just do some text. So now you can see that we're rendering some text and then some JavaScript value here. So our age, we're going to do kind of similar thing. Okay, I want you to, if your project is broken, then maybe try to refork it from that from here, from what I sent the code box up here. And I want you to add one more piece of data onto the screen. So wherever you want to add it, maybe above age, I want you to add their best friend, that string, into this profile here. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Clint asked why no backticks, and so Alejandro's right. This is JSX syntax. Actually, we can do backticks. So, but if we do backticks, then we're doing JavaScript stuff. So if we're doing JavaScript stuff, it all has to be inside the curly braces. So we could do something like this, wrap the entire thing in curly braces, and then in backticks like that, and then do this, and this will still work. But this is a little bit messier than something like this. So we're going to keep it, but that does come in handy. That definitely comes in handy later. But we're going to keep it like this because this is pretty easy to see what's going on. Yeah, Marshall is drinking the Kool-Aid. All right, let's add, on your own, I want you to add their best friend. I want you to list their best friend in the view right here. And I'll give you about 1.5 minutes for that. Okay, so hopefully, let's see, someone is, yeah, so when it had, Anthony, if you're stuck here, this folder was outside of source. So I had to drag components into our source component, and then we could import it like this. Where before, it was going to have to be that because it was outside of source. If you're stuck, the link right here, just go back to this link and refork it, and then you'll be at this point where it's a working project. Okay, so you guys probably did something like this. If you have a different solution and it's working, that's totally fine too. Props.student dot best. Let's see, what is the property? Best friend. And then close that like so. There we go. Best friends. Okay, now Marshall has noticed how this is becoming very reusable. So Marshall, can you please show us what we're going to do inside our index.js to make this a reusable component? Boom. Yes, perfect. It's so perfect. I'm going to copy and paste. Boom. Okay, and we can even do one more. Let's do Ron. There we go. So that's a good question. Why did we do props.student and not props.hogwarts-student? So we do props.student because that's what we named. That's how we did it on how we put the attribute on here. For example, if we wanted to do this, Hogwarts student, we can do that, but we have to rename it here. Once we rename that, then it works again. So the props dot whatever has to match the attribute that we're passing in. What if we did something like blurg, props.blurg? Well, in here, we would have to pass in a blurg attribute. Does that make sense, Michelle? So the reason we did props.student is because we passed in a student attribute. Lucas says, is that considered bad though, like repeating our code? Yes, so there is a better way to do this, which we're not going to learn today. I'm assuming this is what you're talking about, Hogwarts student, Hogwarts student. So first of all, this is getting there. Instead of copying and pasting this 3 times inside our app component, we only have this one line being repeated. We're going to learn very soon how to do this in an even more dry way. So this is like halfway dry. This is like you just got out of the ocean, or you got out of the ocean like half an hour ago, and you've been kind of drying in the sun. Well, then you'd be all the way dry. We'll say you got out of the ocean 5 minutes ago, and you're still a little wet, but you're almost dry. So that's what this is. Okay, we've been having fun. We're almost dry. We're going to do something later that will make this completely dry. Then there was a question, is there a way to have auto tags form like we have in HTML5 syntax? It's kind of tiring. I know. That's one thing I do not like about Code Sandbox, and I apologize for that. If someone can figure that out, have auto closing tags, please tell me, and you will get 50 points for your Hogwarts house of choice. Okay, so I want it to be one line. Generates every student upon request. Something like this. You're getting close. I'm not gonna tell you. Oh man. Okay. All right. Cool. So we will learn how to make this more dry later. But this, you guys are starting to see the power of these components already. We've quickly and easily displayed the component 3 different times. So what I want to do now is open this up and kind of look under the hood at what's going on. Well, why do I keep doing that? I missed there we go. Hello. Okay. So let's take a look at this. We will get into the homework and go over that so you guys are ready for that today. But let's take a look at all of this, what's going on under the hood. So as you can see, we have just a whole bunch of divs. In here, we can't see our all our different components, right? These are just divs. This is exactly what our components are outputting. A div, let's add a class name so we can see. We'll call this the student component. And this should update. So we've got 3 student component divs. And then inside of that is all of our data, right? Let's look at this in React and let's see what's going on. So in our app, we have, we're rendering a div with the class name app. So our app function has a div with the class name app, and it is rendering 3 different Hogwarts student components, just like we show right here. So let's click on this and let's look at this right down here. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit because usually it'll be on the right. This will be how you guys will see it. So when you click on one of these components that's being passed in, you see over here that the React tool is telling us what props are available to us on this component. So we're being passed the student prop on each of these. I wish I'd keep it open. So for this first one, we can see that it's the Harry Potter component, or Harry Potter student object on our props. So going back to the question we looked at a minute ago, let's see, that Michelle asked, if we change this again back to blurg, and save all of that, now we have a prop named blurg. That's our student object. Okay, so this is a really good way if you're stuck on something and for some reason your props aren't showing up, then look on here and make sure that you're accessing things the correct way. Yeah, that's a good question. Let's pass more than one prop. We're going to glance over questions real quick and see if we missed anything. Nope, we're not going to do for each. We're going to do it a different way. Oh, good, cool. Yay. Yay, Jeremy. 50 points for your Gryffindor House of Choice. Okay, can you pass more than one props? What did you do to add React to Chrome on Inspect? So that you just go to Chrome React Tools, and it's this, add this extension in Chrome. And then it gives you I'll drop this. This was in the chat yesterday, but I'll do it one more time for you guys there. So this gives us this React tab up here. So elements, console, sources, network, those are all the built-in ones. Now we have a React one where we can inspect each thing here. Okay, so let's do one more thing. Let's do, let's go back to let's go into here, and we have our resident Slytherin, right? So let's make a Draco person. identity, slick hair. We'll just do that. Best friends are, wow, drawing a blank. Anyways, you guys tell me who their best friends are. Crab and Goyle, thank you. Crab and Goyle. Okay, now we don't have a house for any of these students, right? So, let's change this back to student. And we'll change this back to student. Okay, so we're going to add a second attribute here called house. And this one's just going to be a string. And so we're going to give the Gryffindor house, hopefully that's spelled right, to these three. Now we're going to add one more student, and that's going to be Draco. And he gets the house of Slytherin. Okay, so we haven't displayed this anywhere yet. We've got all of our Hogwarts students displaying. This, you'll notice that we haven't broken anything just by adding this. You can add whatever you want here, whatever attributes you want, and it won't break it. But you can't do the opposite. You can't do props.student.name without having the student there. Okay, so let's add our students' houses. So we're going to say, we're going to have an H4 again and give their houses. What are we going to do right here? What are we putting inside our curly braces to add the house to each of our students? Ooh, props.house and props.student.house. Who's going to receive 10 points? Who's got it right? Very confident. And for good reason, that is correct. So we're going to do props.house. Patrick, the reason it's not student is now our student is the object that's passed in right here. And our student object, like our Draco profile, does not have a house on it. So if we look, our props, this is what our props looked like before we added the house. We're now adding a new attribute called house. That's just a string. So yeah, dot, dot, dot. Okay. So we have props.student that has our student information. And then we have props.house that is the house that they belong to. Gryffindor, 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 Slytherin. Now this is a little bit contrived because we would probably want to have this property inside the student object, but that's okay. You guys are smart enough to understand what we're trying to do here and how it's making this a little bit different. Oh, okay, cool. Good job. Yep, so you did the more correct way. But yeah, so we did it separate. We had our houses as its own property, as its own prop. Cool. 10 points, actually 20 points for doing it how it should have been done in the first place. Okay, cool. We're just about done, guys. Today we've looked at props and we have been passing, we pass our data from our component to our wrapper component, and we're displaying, we've made this Hogwarts student component dynamic by adding props. There are other ways, or there's other uses for props other than just displaying data like this. For example, if I go to my dashboard, I've got this kind of quick example of a dynamic button prop or app. And so the app, so this would be the function that would be in your components folder. Actually, yeah. So this is what we'd be exporting and importing. So let's take a look at this real fast. We've got a button that has a class name that is using an interpolated string. And so it gets this dynamic button class added to it, but it's also taking in this props.type object, or the props object, and looking for the type prop that's being passed to it. And then we're also getting text, props.text, passed to our button with each time we're rendering that. So the first one, first of all, let's look at our CSS. Dynamic button, by default, has a teal background, like this first click me here. Okay, by default, it has a teal background. So this first button doesn't have a type on it. So we're using type in the case of these other ones to change the button color. So this first one is just the default teal color, and we're passing the text click me. The second one has a type danger, as well as the fourth. Yep, so this is the same idea behind Bootstrap, but I'm actually just doing my own styling. I didn't import Bootstrap at all. So the second and fourth button have the type danger. So when this gets, let's look at this. When this gets rendered, you'll see that we have a button that has the class dynamic button and the class danger. And same with our fourth button. So now we can take that idea, and we've got that this button has a class danger on it, and we can add some CSS for a button with the class danger. So what I did was, in my CSS, I said, well, if it's a dynamic button that also has the class danger, I want to override the background to be red. Or if it has the class warning, I want to override the background to be yellow and the text to be black. So for my type danger buttons, I'm passing in a prop called type, props.type, which is getting added through JavaScript to my class name. So it's going to add the class warning to this button. And we can see that right here. This button gets the class dynamic button and warning. And you can even see up here that our first button has the class undefined, because this came through undefined as our first one, because it doesn't have type. So there's a lot more that we can do with props to make cool dynamic things happen. So now you saw how cool it was when we were doing this. You saw how cool and dynamic things were, and you got a little taste of the Kool-Aid. Now imagine this: if you wanted to use any one of these buttons somewhere else in our app. If you wanted a teal button, a red button, or a yellow button, all you have to do is just drop this line into the app, and boom, you have your red button. Or if you want your yellow button, all you have to do is now drop this one line of code into your yellow. Awesome. Mind blown. Yes, I will paste this link as well. Pasted. Okay. All right. So let's look at today's project. I hesitate to do this, but 30 points to Slytherin. Today's, I hesitate because I'm like through and through a Gryffindor. Every single test I've ever taken, I've always landed in Gryffindor. So obviously, it hurts me to pass points to you, Brian. Hey. Okay, let's look at today's project. Today is calculator day. So the project is down here, and you are going to be building this, the UI for this. Dun, dun, dun. This is going to stretch you a little bit. This is going to be kind of tough. You're going to have to remember from the last 5 weeks a lot of your CSS stuff. The MVP for this project is to get this to render in the browser. You don't have to make it functional. We just want to see this happening. And we want to see this happening with using dynamic components. So yesterday you had this image where we kind of explained, all right, this is where this is going to go. This is a component that's going to have these components inside it. We're not going to do that for you today. Today you get to make the architecture decisions on which components to use, which of these you're going to break down into this component tree like this. So just like yesterday, everything that you need to get started is going to be inside this calculator file. So you're going to have to click in twice from this main folder. Click into calculator, click into calculator. Where you get to the point that you see package.json, that's where you can do yarn install and yarn start. So you have to have a package.json in order to do this stuff. Or even better, re-listen to them on Audible, because that dude does awesome. Okay, side note, I got sidetracked. All right, so today, project. MVP just needs to be displayed properly. Functionality will be part of the stretch assignment, and it's actually a really fun stretch to be able to click on the buttons and get this calculator working. It'd be really cool. If you get to that point, then feel free to DM me and send me your project. I'd love to take a look at it. That'd be awesome. All the files, just like yesterday, everything you need is inside your components. You can find all the files you need in their respective directory. For example, inside the button components directory, you will see a couple JS files and a couple CSS files. Feel free to add any files for extra components that you feel like you need in order to make this work. So let's look at those real quick. Inside your source components, you've got button components, and you've got your buttons here. And then display components, and you've got your calculator display here. All right, so we want to go out of here. Feel free, let's see, it should look like this. All right, before you do anything else, before you continue on this project, before you move forward into writing things, you have a little reading assignment. So click into this URL here. This is a fantastic article on starting to think in React. So this, you need to read this before you jump into your project. Now, once you jump into your project, this article gets you thinking in this component mindset, kind of like is shown right here, and then kind of walks through that, why we do that, how React handles that, and why we're teaching it here at Lambda. So this is an important article for you. Then, once you read that, then take time to break down this image in terms of components. Okay? So read that first, break this down into, maybe even draw it out into components, similar to what's happening here, and then jump into your day 2 MVP requirements. Okay, any questions on that before I let you go for today? I know there was a question earlier about today's homework. Something like, how does it show how, let's see, how what we did today relates to the homework and shows how to get started on it. Okay, so we talked about getting started on it. Yes, time turner. I love Harry Potter days. Okay, so a lot of your project is going to be similar to this. So you're going to have like a number button, and you want to pass it the number 1. And then you're going to have another number button, pass it the number 2, 3. These would probably be like number, something like that. So it's going to look very similar. I'm going to delete that quickly so you can't cheat, except this is recorded. Darn it. So you're going to be doing very similar stuff to this. Inside your, where you're actually rendering and displaying your component, you're going to be passing props down. Okay. Nice time turner. So I think we're good for today. Enjoy your lunch, and please reach out to your PMs or myself if you have questions. Don't forget to struggle a little bit. The 20-minute rule is a good rule of thumb. Work on a problem for 20 minutes before you reach out to your project manager. At that point, reach out to them. If you guys can't get it fixed together, reach out to me or Nate, and we can help you at that point. So thanks, guys. Have a great day. You're awesome. React is fun. Keep drinking the Kool-Aid.